this scenario, we are going to pretend that we are dealing with a third-party system that stores CSV files containing data that we want imported in as problems in the ServiceNow instance. Now, these files are required by the third-party system, so we can't delete the files once we've processed them. So we need to kind of keep track of what files we import and ignore those files. The next time around, we only import files that we haven't imported before. Also, these files are only accessible through SFTP over SSL behind the customer's firewall. They're sensitive, and so the customer doesn't want to open up a port on the firewall to talk to ServiceNow. So we have to go through a mid server and communicate via SFTP. Also, some of these files may be really large, and ServiceNow does a really good job of providing an attachment API that allows us to communicate and send files to the instance. However, once files start getting large, the system can be a little bit unreliable or kill processes that are trying to attach files in order to protect the instance. So in that case, we want to shrink those files, compress those files, if you will, before we send them to the instance to be as efficient as possible. So let's go into that. First of all, we're going to be importing the records into our problem table. And as you can tell right now, we don't have any problems in there. Next, what we've done is we've set up a data source. We've set up a data source that's going to expect a CSV file, and it's going to expect that file to be zipped. And once it comes in, it's going to run it through our problem transformation logic. So now what we need to do is we need to set up a FTP connection to our server. We'll put in the host. And we need to specify that the protocol is going to be SFTP, which is FTP over a secure shell. And our port is going to be 22 in this case. We'll set our credentials. And let's also say that because some of these files may be large, we do want to set a keep alive interval to be every 5 minutes. We want to keep that connection alive with the FTP server. Now we'll go ahead and submit that. And the next thing we're going to do is go and create a file grabber profile to grab these records. Okay, we'll select the mid server that we're working with. Let's run this on demand. And we do need a place on the mid server that's going to store the files from the FTP server before they get sent over to the instance. We have a folder on the mid server called FTP Sandbox. So we'll put that in. Now again, we are using FTP, so we'll check the checkbox. And we need to specify what FTP connection is going to be used to gather those files. And this is the connection we made earlier. Now we have to specify the folder directory where our files are stored. So if we were to look at our FTP server, we'll see that our files are stored in this path. So we'll go ahead and type in this path. All right. Then we're going to use a data source. And we want to bring in any CSV files. So we'll create a regular expression that says any file ending in CSV. Now, since some of these files may be large, we will compress those files before we send them to the instance. Also, since we cannot delete the files or move the files once we've imported them, in order to prevent us from importing them even further, we're only going to attach the newest files. What's going to happen is each time we do an import, we're going to sort the files by oldest to newest, and we'll pick off the oldest first, and we'll store that timestamp here. So the next time that we query the FTP server, we're going to get the next file, the next oldest file. That way, once we reach the end of our list, we're going to not import any more records until a new file lands on the FTP server. And when it does, then we'll pick up some more information. So we'll just leave that checkbox checked. And then we'll go ahead and select our data source that I showed you earlier that is accepting a zipped CSV file. And we're going to automatically import the data. Now, again, we'll leave the files alone because that third-party application needs those files to stay there. And we'll go ahead and hit save. All right, so let's try this out. Let's click the execute button. And we'll give it a minute or two to perform all the operations. Okay, now that sufficient time has passed, we'll go over to our problems table and we'll refresh it. And it looks like we have now about 12 problems that have been recorded. Now we'll go ahead and execute this again. Before we do so though, if you notice here, here's the latest timestamp that we read on this import. So we'll execute this again. And we'll watch that timestamp increment. As you can see, that timestamp incremented right there. That means it found another file that was newer than the last time we did the import. So if we go back to our problems, we'll see that now we have 27 problem records that have come into the system. Also, if we go and we look at the data source that we're using, our CSV file that was stored on the FTP server was zipped before it got attached to the data source and processed. That gives us a much smaller data file to transfer to the instance.